Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and in this 2-minute tying video, I'm going to show you how to tie a really simple leech pattern. Stay tuned. Let's start tying this Meyer's mini leech. In my Stonfo transformer vise, I have a hook from Allen Fly Fishing. This is their MP003BL. This is a carp hook, and that BL designation means that it's barbless. This is definitely one of their popular hooks. It is a really heavy wire hook. You won't be bending this one anytime soon. It's got a very sharp point, and you can also use it in other applications, such as for tube flies. So keep that in mind with this one. Now we have very few materials that we have to worry about, and that's a great thing for this pattern. For starters, I'm going to use a little bit of 8/0 uni thread. The color is black. We're just going to build a nice little base up. I'm going to start this directly behind the eye of the hook. I want to try my best to make sure that my wraps are relatively touching. We're going to stop at about the halfway point, and we're going to add our body material, which is going to be green Flashabou. I'm just going to select around 3 or 4 fibers of this. Trim them off. I'm making them probably a little excessively long just for the purposes of this video. But once I have them clumped, I'm going to lock them in place with simply one wrap. And then just to kind of show you a little tip here, a little technique, once I have them there, I'm just going to kind of ease off with my right hand. That's the hand that's holding the thread pressure. And with my left hand, I'm going to pull these fibers back towards the tail of the hook. And by doing that, whenever you speed up in this technique, you then don't have to worry about clipping off the butt ends with your scissors. Instead, you could just simply wrap back, lock them in place, and you basically have saved yourself a step. Now, as I'm wrapping back, I'm going to be kind of pulling these taut a little bit, and I want to make sure my black thread now is really touching each wrap. We'll call that touching wraps as close as possible. And I'm going to wrap just a little bit down the bend of the hook, and then wrap my way back up. Now I'll lock in the butt ends of those fibers, and I'm going to bring my thread back to about the hook point. At this point now I have my green crystal flash. I'm going to take these fibers. You can twist them just a little bit if you want to turn them to kind of try your best to keep them together, and they're going to try to split up on you, and that's not a bad thing if they split a little bit. What's important is that by us keeping this black thread base for the body, we're really going to make sure that it's more of a darker green that we're tying in. We're going to wrap those up. Before locking them in, I just want to get a quick glance, see if I missed any really significant gapping. There's none there, so we're simply going to lock these in place with just a couple wraps. I didn't like how my thread was kind of seesawing there. And next we're going to move on to our wing. And for our wing, we're going to be using some micro pine swirl. These are zonker strips. The color's black. I have a piece that's pre-cut, and make sure whenever you first get this stuff, you take a look at it. Sometimes if you don't have a chance to look at this in person and you have to buy it online or from one of the mail orders, you really want to make sure that as you kind of stroke these fibers in the opposite direction, they all line up that way. And if they don't, you may want to just kind of remove that little piece. I've already pre-cut this piece, and just to kind of put it in perspective, this is a little bit more than 1 inch. Now Landon, he recommends tying this fly around that 1-inch mark, and this is going to be around that 1-inch mark. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more after the tying component. But to tie this piece in, we just want to make sure that all of that rabbit fur is all, we'll say, bending towards the back, bending towards the rear of the hook. So I want to tie in the front of it, making sure that whenever I lock this in place, I have everything going straight back. It's going in that direction, and it's a smooth transition where I tie it in. Because whenever I put these locking wraps in place, and you can see how I've just locked them in now, everything's going to be black, but I'm going to be tying in one more material, and I want to make sure when I tie that material in, it's not going to bulk up the head of the fly. Well, speaking of that last material, this last material is going to be considered our collar. And the collar is going to be black ostrich herl. And one thing that I've kind of found out over the years is that not all ostrich herl is created equally. And what I really look for whenever I'm buying ostrich herl, I want these individual fibers to be as long as possible. And in this case, I kind of classify this piece as more of a medium piece. I don't think of this as that really extra bushy, extra select fiber, but this ostrich herl is definitely a perfect one for this fly. So I'm going to take out 2 pieces. So let me find 2 relatively bushy pieces of herl. So I have them selected. It's from about the middle. And I'm going to cut those off. Now I'm going to cut them by the base. So their tips are in my left hand. I'm going to make it so that the bud fibers are now in my left hand, and that's where I'm going to lock them in place. Now I am tying in 2 of these at one time. And keep in mind that for the purposes of this video, tying in 2 really, it's nice, but once this fly is done for this video, I'm really going to have to tie a few more of these flies, because those 2 that I just tied in, I could tie at least 3 or 4 of this pattern with. So kind of keep that in mind whenever you're cutting your materials. But I really like to have that a little bit more of a fuller collar on this fly. I'm going to wrap my thread forward. Now I'm only going to need to make around, we'll say 4 or 5 at the most turns of this stuff, because you're going to see it's going to build up really quickly. And it's going to want to shoot towards the front of the fly. And in fact, those kind of separated a little bit. They separated way too quick for me. So I'm just going to back this off. Do this again. I want to really make sure that they kind of come together at the same point. They don't separate too fast. And now that I have them both at the eye of the hook, I'm just going to hold them straight up, basically perpendicular to the hook. Lock them in place with a couple wraps. Couple wraps behind them, couple wraps in front of them. They're not going to be going anywhere. Get those out of the way. Take a look at my fly. Make sure it's tied the way I want it. Once it is, I'm just going to stroke those back just a little bit. One more wrap in front of them. Lock them in place with 1 whip finish. Then I'm going to grab a little bit of head cement. Put some head cement on my thread. That one really gawped up. Let's get that out of there a little bit. And the same thing. 1 additional whip finish. That thread is going nowhere. And now we have our finished Meyer's Mini Leech. So we have a nice length to our tail. This is just a hair over an inch, maybe 1.5 inches in length right now. We have a really nice body on that. That green body will definitely turn just a little bit darker in the water. And remember, we have that black thread underneath it. We have a really nice wing on it. It's going to really do a great job in representing and imitating that black leech. And then finally, we have a really nice collar that's going to move a lot. It's going to undulate once it gets wet in that water. Now that we've finished tying this fly, let's kind of shift the camera angle here and talk just a little bit more about Meyer's Mini Leech. Does this pattern fit perfectly in my 2-minute tying series or what? Well, let me tell you just a little bit more now about the Meyer's Mini Leech, both from a fly tying and a fly fishing perspective. For starters, I came across this pattern in the October, November, December 2015 issue of Fly Fisherman. And it was an article that was written by Landon Mayer, who created this fly. What immediately drew me into this pattern was the fact that, aside from thread and a hook, Landon only chose 3 additional materials. Then I read a little bit more about leeches, and Landon went on to talk about the notion that whenever we're tying to represent leeches, we typically tie in the 2-inch to 3-inch range. And while there are definitely a ton of that size leeches in our waterways, he wanted to point out that don't be afraid to tie these smaller, more around that 1-inch range, because if you're fishing streams, rivers, even tailwaters, and in especially the shallower sections, you're going to find a ton of leeches in that size range, and he wants you to really fish them accordingly. Now, if you think back to the video that I just showed you, or we'll just say that the pattern that I just tied in this video, you're going to say, well, wait a second, this wasn't a 1-inch leech, because mine was really inching more to that 1.5 inches, nearly 2 inches, and that's because I tied mine more for carp fly fishing. Now, there are a ton of fly fishermen for carp out there, and this is a perfect pattern that's gonna really meet that genre's needs. Though I wanna point out that in this article, Landon's really saying, hey, don't be afraid to tie this on a size 14 or on a size 16 scud hook. Make sure it's one of those extra heavy hooks just so you have enough weight behind that pattern. But for me, I wanted to immediately modify this fly and take it for all the carp fly fishermen out there, because I think this is going to be a perfect carp fly in certain situations. Now let's next talk about modifying this fly, and that's going to relate kind of to the fishing as well, because as I originally mentioned, there are so few materials to this, but one addition that I would consider making is adding a little bit of weight to it. Maybe a cone head, or more than likely some dumbbell eyes. Now, if you do decide to add those, remember, that's going to invert the fly whenever you're fishing it. So kind of keep all that stuff in mind. But if you're going to be fishing this in, we'll say, more of those medium depth rivers, or if you're going to fish it in a lake, a pond, some type of still water, I would absolutely add a little bit of weight to get it down a little bit. Now, if you're going to be fishing it for carp in more shallow situations, that doesn't matter, still water or moving waters, I would leave it just the way it is. Again, knowing that this is going to slowly settle on the bottom. You can twitch it a little bit, it'll have some nice movement to it, and hopefully those carp will come and they'll just pick it right off. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind when modifying this fly is the fact that you can change its color just quick, and it can represent a lot of other possible bait fish in the water. So that's something to consider, because whenever I first looked at this fly, I said, yeah, this is going to be a great leech imitation, but can I also just change its color to represent some bait fish in some of the lakes that I fish? Maybe some type of a shiner if I'm going after some steelhead? And the answer is absolutely. This is a great fly to modify based on what you're trying to imitate in your local waters. Now, let's kind of shift gears and talk about that water situation when we're fly fishing with this fly. Now, Landon recommends fishing this kind of in those shallow rivers where you're going to allow it to basically just sink down, and you're going to fish it very similar to a nymph. You can also fish it on the swing like a streamer. You can strip it in. And then finally, he even recommends fishing it directly under a hopper, some type of a, we'll say, a dry dropper situation in which you have a heavier fly that's going to help suspend this fly. Now, keep in mind that whenever we added that zonker strip, once that thing gets wet, it's going to add just a significant amount of weight. So ensure that if you are fishing a hopper on top, it is one that will significantly hold this fly up, because you're going to need a heck of a dry fly on top. But Landon definitely encourages you to do that. Well, with all that said, I really hope that you enjoyed watching this 2-minute tying video on the Meyer's Mini Leech. If you have any questions or comments regarding this video, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below, or you can email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. And I want to additionally ask you, if you fish any leech patterns, what are some of your favorite ones aside from the black woolly bugger? Because that's probably my go-to leech pattern that I love to fish both for trout and for steelhead. But what are some of yours? If you'd like to watch more fly tying and fly fishing videos similar to this one, you can check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. I also have a Facebook page, and if you like that, you'll receive some regular fly fishing and fly tying updates. Well, once again, thank you everybody for watching this video of the Meyer's Mini Leech. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again soon.